Be nice at least.
Nice. Do you have a tripod?
I don't have a tripod.
Okay.
But everything I have.
Oh.
The aliens, everybody wants to know the truth.
Canon doing everything backwards.
Here you go. I'm gonna go use the bathroom before everything
Sir?
happens.
What? Really? I'm excited.
All right. Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to, so this is our first, what is this doing here? This is our first of our science department lecture series. And we just decided to go all out and make it really weird just to begin with. So, we'll see if we can up that ante next time. I don't know how. But so if you're here for chapel credit, there are like the little barcode things. What do you call those? QR codes. Sorry, I'm old. And you can scan those, I guess, with your phone, and they do something magical. If you're here for one of the classes that's offering extra credit, I will have a secret passcode that I will give you at the end that you can give to your professors if they're giving extra credit. And there you go. Bada bing, bada boom. All right, so let's get started. A couple of you guys, I think I know almost a good chunk of you guys. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Josh Holbrook. I'm assistant professor of environmental science here. Not aliens, unfortunately, but we are going to talk a little bit about that tonight. And what's cool, or what's interesting, is there are no real experts in aliens because we haven't discovered them. You can find people with PhDs in astrobiology. They're living a lie. They haven't found anything on other planets yet. So let's jump in. And we'll have a Q&A at the end. This will go for about an hour or so. But then we'll have a Q&A if you want to just get your chapel credit. You don't have to stay for the Q&A, of course. I'm not going to force you to do that. But here we go. So before we start, there are a couple of things that I want you to remember before we begin. First thing is that if you want to be a good critical thinker, you have to follow the evidence. You have to be willing to follow the evidence above or beyond what we're predisposed to believe or what we prefer to be true, right? There are lots of things that we would prefer to be true, and sometimes they are not true. There's some seats over here, guys, if you want to come on in. So we've got to engage with the evidence. We've got to try to poke holes in it. We've got to approach it like scientists. And what scientists love to do is tear things apart to see how they work or if they work. And you've got to be ready to abandon your pet theory if the evidence comes up, right? So if new evidence comes forward and it just destroys your case, then you have to be ready to say, oh, well, I was wrong. Let's move on to something else. Second big thing to remember before we really delve in is that reality is weird, right? Something being weird is not proof that it is true, and it is not proof that it's false, right? There's no getting around the fact that reality is weird. Just think of the origin myths that we have, right? So if you were a Babylonian, you would believe that you have the god Marduk. He creates the heavens and the earth from the corpse of the god Tiamat. That's kind of weird, right? What about if you're a naturalist? Well, you think that a long time ago there was nothing exploded, and now we have TikTok. That's kind of weird, right? If you're a Christian, even the Christian story is weird. You have Yahweh, who's this all-powerful, omnipotent creator, and he creates things out of his own skill. He pre-existed everything, always existed, and he makes us. Everything is weird if you look at it close enough. All those origin stories are outside of my day-to-day experience, and if I think about them too hard, my head hurts. And if your head doesn't hurt, either you're smarter than me or you're not thinking about them hard enough. But we know it happened, right? We know somehow we got here, right? Because there has been an unbroken lineage of organisms to get to where you are today. right? So you had parents, and your parents had parents, and your parents had parents, and if you believe a naturalistic point of view or a evolutionary theory, that went all the way back to the first cell, right? So we have to, when we're approaching topics like this, we have to resist a gut reaction of, okay, is this too weird, or is this a conspiracy theory? Instead, we need to ask, is there evidence? How high quality is the evidence that we have? And so I'm going to give you some evidence tonight. Some of it's going to be pretty hard evidence. Some of it's going to be more speculative. You shouldn't approach that uncritically. You should think about it. You should ask questions about it in the Q&A. Try to stump me. That would be awesome. I love that. I love being challenged. And so there are going to be topics tonight that I have no doubt, if you are a sane, rational person, which most of you might be, you're going to think, well, that sounds absurd. That sounds absolutely ridiculous. So do all those origin stories, but here we are, right? When we're talking about things outside of our day-to-day experience, our day-to-day sphere, absurdity is kind of a meaningless word, right? And if you doubt me, go find Dr. Spencer and talk to him about quantum physics for a while. Hi, Matthew. Welcome. Come on in. All right, so let's start off with this question. This is like a preamble to preamble. So I'm an ecologist. I look at how things interact with each other. I look how plants and animals interact with their environment, with the atmosphere, etc. Why be interested in aliens? Well, first off, I'm not necessarily scared to investigate things that I disagree with. Because if all truth is God's truth, then we shouldn't be afraid to investigate that truth, right? So a couple years ago, I read Dawkins' The God Delusion, and I was really kind of worried at the time, like I'm going to read this, and this is going to really challenge my faith. Well, guess what? All truth is God's truth, and I got to the end of it, and I was like, is that all they got? Like, is that it? That's not a strong argument. We don't need to be afraid to dive deep to investigate things. The things that are patently untrue, they usually expose themselves pretty quickly. But to actually answer the question, why would a rational ecologist be interested in aliens? I'm going to tell you that I wasn't really interested in aliens at all. I didn't really have an interest because it all seemed absurd and without evidence. Until recently, that was somewhat reasonable of a belief, of an expectation, I think, in terms of the evidence that I had. And then something happened on the front page of the New York Times. So this is the front page of the New York Times from December 2017. The title is Glowing Ores and Black Money, the Pentagon's Mysterious UFO Program. And so this was a front page article in the New York Times that detailed the operations of a program called OSAP. So, which I had to go to the slide because there's no way I can remember what that acronym stands for, because the U.S. government is all about its acronyms. So this stands for the Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Application Program. And so you might be thinking, like, what does that have to do with, like, aliens and stuff? Well, this front page article was about OSAP, and OSAP was a Pentagon UFO program. In the article, they call it ATIP. Its real name was OSAP. That was sort of a declassified name for it. And with this program, concurrently with it, there were released 3 videos from the military of what they are calling unidentified aerial phenomena. What is unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP? Well, it turns out that there's a stigma attached to the word UFO, unidentified flying object, so the government started calling them UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. What does that mean? It means a UFO. So they're the same thing. It's just, you sound a little less crazy if you call them UAP, right? You're more sophisticated. And so one of these videos was from the USS Nimitz carrier group. This happened in 2004 off the coast of California. And there was a tic-tac shaped object that was caught on radar. Yeah, it was shaped like a tic-tac. So tasty, but and so this object was caught on radar and various sensors coming from 60,000 feet. It actually came from above 60,000 feet above sea level. That was just the top range of their sensors, and to sea level in less than 1 second without going boom, so it wasn't an asteroid. And the Navy sent 4 jets to intercept this object, all 4 of which observed it. So what happened? Well, these 4 jets observed and saw, once again, kept on observing with multiple sensors. This object actively jammed their sensors, which is an act of war. And then it disappeared and reappeared 60 miles away at their predetermined rendezvous point. Let's see. We're going to watch a short video just because it shows some of these craft here. So there we go.
These 3 videos released by the Department of Defense change the way many people see what we can't explain.
Both of you mentioned UFOs. Immediately what comes to mind are blue green van, tinfoil hats. That's not all we're dealing with.
In 2004, off the coast of California, an F-18 Super Bowl training exercise was suddenly interrupted by a call over the radio that would come to the plane and have David Flavor's career.
You know, there's some things in your life that you just remember in vivid detail what happened. That's one of them, because honestly, the strangest, most obscure thing I've ever seen find.
Flair, the commanding officer of the Navy Strike Fighter Squadron 41, and another F-18 scrambled to check out an unusual radar 80 miles off the coast.
As we're looking around, the backseater and the other airplane comes up and says, hey, Tickler, do you see? And the boy says, I'm like, dude, do you see that? As soon as we look down, we see what I know we see it's a little active. Pointing north south, and it's just going forward back up. It's bouncing around. Yeah, like ping pong ball. It's shaped on it's what it looked like it was made of. And perfectly smooth, white impact. But for people that need a bigger visualization, you try to program it.
Fravor says the F-18s began circling Fravor at 20,000 feet, and the so-called tic-tac only about 50 feet above the surface of the water.
And I say, hey, I'm going to go check this thing out. And the other pilot say, I'm going to stay up high. And then it starts coming up. We call it 2-circle flight, but it's coming out, not coming out. So literally, we're over there. There's no doubt because of here. So here it is. I cut across, and I get to about half a mile of it. You know, so I'm about halfway across the circle. It gets in front of me, which is sort of proof it's gone. It's gone like that. What do you mean proof it's gone? Exactly that. Like, it's 1 minute there, and the next second, it's like magic. So I asked them on the airplane. I said, hey, you guys see that? And they're like, it's gone, it just disappeared. When you saw this kind of performance, what was the first thing that went through your mind? What the hell was that?
Once back on the carrier, Fravor seemed for the next crew what happened. That crew took off ready to capture something on camera. And this is what they saw.
I guess the biggest question is, what do you think it is? I honestly don't know. I don't think that we have developed that technology. I don't think we developed it on this planet. We still to this day have no idea what it was, what we saw, what we chased, what we named. It was pretty spectacular.
A report from that incident eventually made its way to the Pentagon, across the desk of Louis Elizondo, the former director of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program.
In essence, what that program was an investigatory body looking at what we call a UAP, probably with an accurate study on the UFO phenomenon. The bottom line here is that over the past several decades, we in the Department of Defense and Intelligence Community have been noticing things in our airspace that don't have wings, they don't have cockpits, they don't have even an obvious sign of propulsion like an engine, and yet still they're able to defy the natural effects of Earth's gravity.
In 2020, the Pentagon declassified 3 videos, the Tic Tac video and 2 others filmed on the East Coast in January 2015. Other countries have made similar public disclosures. Also in 2004, the Mexican Air Force confirmed this video shot by one of their pilots near the coast of Baja California. In 2014, a helicopter from the Chilean Navy locked onto an unidentified object emitting what appeared to be some sort of gas or vapor. Both governments have said they investigated but couldn't determine what the objects were. For those like science writer Sarah Scholes, clipped black and white videos always leave a lot to the imagination.
how little information is in them. All we have are these, 30 seconds or a minute of something totally decontextualized. And so everybody kind of gets to think whatever they want to think about them because we don't actually have enough information to form any kind of conclusion, which is UFO's favorite space to live in, the muddy, fuzzy space.
But will 2021 be the year all of that changes because of COVID-19?
Hidden among the many pages of the COVID-19 bill is this mandate to produce a report on unidentified aerial.
We'll get to that. Let's see. All right. So that's fun. So now we have apparently some evidence, and this was where my interest was kind of piqued. Interest from a scientific standpoint. Asking questions like, is there life out there on other planets? What does it look like if it's out there? We shouldn't expect it to look like us, or maybe we should, who knows? Do biology, ecology, and evolution work similarly on other planets? They follow similar patterns. And as a Christian, there's a lot of questions as well, right? So, would God make life elsewhere in the universe? Is that something that we think he would do? Why aren't aliens brought up in the Bible? Or are they? Probably not. If there's intelligent alien life out there, is it fallen or unfallen? Or is that even the right question to ask? If they're fallen, would Christ's sacrifice apply to them? So, if there's something going on here relative to aliens, that's a really big deal, right? Like the biggest deal in the past couple of 100 years. Not as big a deal as like the incarnation or the resurrection, but probably on par with the first person that looked in the under a microscope in the 1600s and found a whole other world of microbes, right? Except now it's like we've got macrobes. That's a C.S. Lewis reference. If you get it, good. So we're going to tackle this alien question in two parts. First, we're going to ask the question of, is there extraterrestrial life out there? By the way, all these pictures are like public domain and stuff, so I didn't take any UFO. Actually, I have one UFO picture that I took at the very end, so wait. And number two, do we have extraterrestrial life here? So what are people seeing and experiencing in our own skies, rather, right? So there are lots of people seeing signs in the heavens. Where have I heard that before? And they're actually increasing exponentially over the past 70 years and accelerating even more the past couple of years. So what are they? I'm going to give some hypotheses. I'll give you kind of my hypotheses, but also some alternate hypotheses as well. Okay, so ET life out there. Everybody ready for it to get weird? Yes, good. Okay, awesome. So let's talk about aliens out there. Extraterrestrial life in the universe. The universe is big, in case you haven't realized that yet. There are maybe between 100 to 400 billion stars in the Milky Way. How accurate that is, there's certainly a lot. There are billions, and probably somewhere in there. And that's our galaxy, in case you didn't know. So if someone says, "Oh, it was so dark I could see the Milky Way," you just say you could just look at the Milky Way by looking at our sun, but maybe don't look at the sun. The Milky Way is an average-sized galaxy. So we have our galaxy, and then there are 100 to 200 billion galaxies, maybe more, in the universe. So if you're keeping track, we're looking at the number of stars in the observable universe to be something in the ballpark of septillions, which is 24 zeros. I didn't know that. I had to look it up. So that's not even accounting for something like the multiverse, which may or may not exist. Probably not. And some of these stars have planets, right? We're not unique in the fact that planets occur elsewhere in the universe. Some of them have planets, and some of these planets may be Earth-like. And it turns out we've discovered I say we, I didn't do anything, I was not involved, in case that's unclear. But we as humanity, the corporate we, have discovered 20 Earth-like planets as of yet. And so what do we mean by Earth-like planets? We mean these are planets that occur in what we would call the Goldilocks zone. So it's not too near the sun, not too far from the sun. You can have liquid water. Everything is just right, which is why it's the Goldilocks zone. So, and that number is certainly going to increase. Our capacity to observe these planets is increasing, especially with the James Webb Telescope, which we'll get to in a minute. But in a universe of septillions of stars, you might have billions or more of Earth-like planets out there. So what does that tell you about the odds of there being ET life? Well, contrary to what you might hear, it only tells you something giving one huge, or huge if you're Donald Trump, assumption. Thank you, I had to get that joke in there. The big assumption. And you know what happens when you assume? I'm not going to tell you. So the big assumption is abiogenesis deterministic. Okay, what does that mean? Abiogenesis is a fancy word. Do I have it here? Yeah, no. Is a fancy word that means life arising from non-life. So bio means life, and genesis means beginning. So how do you get life from non-life? And so this question, is abiogenesis deterministic, is asking, is life like baking a cake? You put all the chemicals together, you bake them, and poof, you get life. If this assumption is correct, right, so you have RNA, perhaps amino acids, some sort of environmental stimuli, and you get life. If this assumption is correct, then life should be common. We should see life all throughout the universe when we have the capacity to look. The problem with that is, and obviously if this is not correct, if abiogenesis is not deterministic, if life is not like baking a cake, then we shouldn't expect to see it out there. So the problem is, very few Christians would say that abiogenesis is deterministic. I'm not even talking about, obviously, like young earth creationists, etc., would say that yeah, definitely God created life by a special act of creation. But even Christians that say that life evolved on our planet would usually say that God gave it some help to get started, right? There was some sort of special thing God did that took something that wasn't alive, and now there's something alive. It wasn't just natural processes. Most Christians, I would say, most non-deist Christians would say that. So, if you're a Christian, your assumption is probably that life is not deterministic, that God had some sort of a hand in it. So, that is one thing to think about. The other problem is that the evidence that we actually have does not support abiogenesis. So we don't have a very big sample size. We know of one planet that has life, and that's Earth, and that's really the only place that we can observe it. But where we have this planet that's pretty good for supporting life, what do we see? Well, we see a couple of things. First off, humans who are intelligent designers, most everybody, we all our brain power, and we have not been able to replicate life in a lab. There were some times where we thought we might have been close, the Miller-Urey experiment and other points, but nobody's been able to create a new life form in a lab. We can tinker with it in all sorts of ways, right? We can make like humanzees and all sorts of unholy stuff, but we can't take chemicals and make them into something more than chemicals, make them into life. The other big evidence against it with our sample size that we have here is that it appears that we only have a single lineage of life on this Earth. In other words, genetic evidence points to that all of Earth shares what's called a LUCA, a last universal common ancestor. In other words, the dominant scientific hypothesis is you've got the bacteria, you've got the archaea, you've got us here in eukaryotes, and you've got animals, fungi, slime molds. they all share a common ancestor, it appears. So there is a tree of life. Why isn't there another tree of life? Why do we only have one lineage? Why isn't there a second tree of life, or a third tree of life, and a fourth tree of life? If Earth is so good for creating life, then how come, as far as we can tell, as far as the evidence that we have says, it's only happened once? That cell that somehow survived and reproduced, and survived and reproduced, and here we are, if you come from that point of view. So, it's a big assumption. We might expect to see a forest of life instead of just a tree of life on our planet if abiogenesis is deterministic. Maybe. There's some qualifications there, but we ain't got time to get into them unless you want to ask questions about them. There you go. So, to scientifically examine this question, one of the things that's happening is this James Webb Telescope. This was launched Christmas 2021. Happy birthday, Jesus. We're going to see if you made any other planets out there. And this will examine other planets for signatures of life. So basically, if life is existing somewhere else, it should have some sort of technological footprint where we can see lights or something, or flying saucers, who knows. Or it should, if it's producing organic molecules, we should be able to see those organic molecules based on their light signature coming from the planet. So that's kind of where we have to leave that scientific side of the question. It all depends on what side of the assumption you fall on, right? We have insufficient means to test our assumptions right now, right? We can't look and say, okay, we have other planets where life is occurring because the chemicals were right. We just don't have that yet. So maybe check back in 5 years after James Webb does a little bit of browsing in the universe. And we'll see. Maybe we'll have an answer, or a better answer. So I want to bookend this in the next section. So this is our first big question. I want to bookend this, and you probably won't be able to read it because it's small, but I'll read it out loud. With a quote from C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis wrote a essay called On Religion and Rocketry. Excellent essay. You should read it, and deals with a lot of these questions of life. And he talks about the alien question in reference to this, so I'm going to read it. It's a lot, but I'll go through it quick. In my time, I have heard two quite different arguments against my religion put forward in the name of science. Still happens. When I was a youngster, people used to say that the universe was not only friendly to life, not friendly to life, but positively hostile to it. Life had appeared on this planet by a millionth chance, and if at one point there had been a breakdown of the elaborate defenses generally enforced against it, we should be rash to assume that such a leak had occurred more than once. Probably life was a purely terrestrial abnormality. We were alone in an infinite desert, which just showed the absurdity of the Christian idea that there was a creator who was interested in living creatures. So if God loves making little living things, why aren't they everywhere? But then came Professor F.B. Hoyle, the Cambridge cosmologist, and in a fortnight or so, everyone I met seems to have decided that the universe was probably quite well provided with inhabitable globes and with livestock to inhabit them, which just showed equally well the absurdity of Christianity with its parochial idea that man could be important to God. There's a warning of what we may expect if we ever do discover animal life, vegetable life doesn't matter, on another planet. Each new discovery, even every new theory, is held at first to have the most wide-reaching technological and philosophical consequences. It is seized by unbelievers on the basis for a new attack on Christianity. It is often, and more embarrassingly, seized by injudicious believers as a basis for a new defense. But usually when the popular hubbub subsided and the novelty has been chewed over by real theologians, real scientists, and real philosophers, both sides find themselves pretty much where they were before. So even if we find aliens, would that necessarily change Christian faith all that much? Who knows? So, there's a theological side to these questions, right? If we find life out there, we could ask would God make life on other planets? Well, of course, that's something we don't know, right? God's a little lot infinitely bit more advanced than we are, and so we don't know if that would be the case. We don't know if E.T., but actually back to this. So would God make life on other planets in the Bible stuff? We don't know yet. It's also might be none of our business. So I actually I did a sermon on this topic at church once. My church is not a UFO cult, I promise. But someone asked a bunch of questions, and I essentially said it's probably none of our business. And one of my friends was ragging on me afterwards because he said, you're one of the few people I know that will do a Q&A and then just tell everybody that it's none of their business. So if there's intelligent life out there, would it need salvation? That's all a question of if it is a fallen species or not, and is it something that possesses a spirit? Does it possess a sense of sin? So Lewis actually speculated in his space trilogy that maybe the great distances that we have between planets is kind of God's quarantine. So things went pretty bad here, and maybe there's so much distance that quarantines us from the rest of the universe so we don't mess it up as well. And now Elon's trying to go to Mars, and I'm very worried. All right, so, and I don't have too much on this question. We can certainly turn it over with some nuances in the Q&A, discuss it more, absolutely. Other than to say, we know from Scripture that Christ made a sacrifice once for all time to become a man, a human, right? Which to me says that if there's ET life out there, if there are aliens, I pray for their sake that they're either unfallen or just don't have eternal spirits like us, because God kind of already used the big guns on us, right? Okay, not weird enough yet. Okay, let's talk about ETs here. It's a UFO photograph from like an Air Force pilot cockpit. So let's look at the broad, let's go, I like that picture. Let's look at the broad evidence and talk about what some of this evidence could be, what it could mean. And so to understand UFOs, you must learn the history of UFOs. And unfortunately, Professor Brandenburg is not here to correct me. That's probably for the best. So let's talk about the history of the UFO phenomenon. And I'll use that term phenomenon a lot to refer to this UFOs and the weird stuff that happens around them. So obviously, it's hard to figure out what was going on pre-industrial revolution, right? You could look to newspaper articles and that sort of thing, but these same newspaper articles also had people with like giant paper mache pterodactyls that they supposedly shot, out west or whatever. It's hard to know, but there are some interesting events. So in Nuremberg in 1561, quite a few witnesses described a celestial phenomenon that was a fight between geometric shapes in the sky and was seen by, quote, many men and women. If you look up the account, it's very interesting because everybody saw it as a call to repentance. And so there we go, a little bit different than what happens nowadays. But then the modern UFO era really kicked off right around the time of World War II, where something called Foo Fighters were seen, which is not the band. The band came second. Which you have a lot with like alien stuff. Like oftentimes, like it's like, did we have little gray aliens that came in like Independence Day first, or did people see them first? Well, Foo Fighters in this case, we know that Foo Fighters, the UFOs, came before Foo Fighters, the band. And so these were described by pilots in Europe during World War II as fiery round craft that pursued Allied craft specifically. I don't know if there were that many reports from Axis craft being pursued. And it outperformed their aircraft, which wasn't saying that much during World War II, but it did, and could disappear and reappear readily. And then sort of the modern UFO era, when it all sort of ramped up and entered the public consciousness, was post-World War II. especially a little old event that happened in 1947. So people seen flying saucers with increasing frequency. Then July 1947 in, you guessed it, Roswell, New Mexico. We had to go there. We just had to go there. So something crashes in July 1947 in a field. And the next day, the U.S. Air Force issues a press release saying that they have captured a flying saucer. That is reported around the world that the U.S. Air Force says, we've captured a saucer. Next day, JK, LOL, it was a weather balloon. We got a little mixed up there. Flying saucer, weather balloon, a little bit difficult to tell the difference. And since then, the U.S. Air Force has actually revised their official story several times, all of which have been documented. And there's you could dive deep. We could do a whole semester on this. Hey, that's a good idea. But people with sworn affidavits that they saw like a saucer-like craft crashed in a field, whatever. Let's keep going. Let's see. July 1952. Do I have this on there? No, that's really small. Okay, I'm just going to tell you what's on there. So July 52, several flying saucers were spotted over Washington, D.C. Jets were scrambled to intercept, as seen by dozens and dozens of people. The objects outran U.S. fighter jets and disappeared. And so there was this concern that all these UFO reports that were popping up would distract our air defenses from a Soviet attack and cause mass hysteria. So the government wanted to get a lid on this pretty quick. So Project Blue Book was formed. That's what's on the left in print. You can't read there. This was a group formed to investigate UFOs, kind of, but also to infiltrate UFO studying groups and to marginalize them and to make UFO researchers appear fringe. So if you're like, man, UFOs are kind of weird, you're probably have been affected by the legacy of this of Project Blue Book, which kind of campaigned a lot of this stuff. So you have off and on sightings through the 1950s all the way up till now, till the 2000s. A lot of them ended up unreported because of the social ramifications, right? If your friend comes up to you and say, hey, I saw a UFO, or hey, I was abducted, it might be time to find a new friend. Maybe not, but that's what people perhaps thought and did think. If you were a pilot and you said you saw a UFO, they might ground you. They might not let you fly anymore, because if you're seeing things while you're flying, maybe you shouldn't be. But these sightings continued with a lot of concentrations in and around American and Russian nuclear facilities. So there are actually dozens of eyewitness accounts of government workers who have now come forward and said that we saw UFOs near our nuclear weapons and they disabled our nuclear launch capabilities. So all of a sudden, we couldn't have launched an attack on Russia if we'd wanted to. And there's actually reports from the Soviet Union of the same thing happening, and actually one story of them, a UFO showing up and their nukes getting armed, which is also scary. Both are kind of scary. Reports of the UFO showing up and all of a sudden their nukes going online as if ready to launch. Yeah, fun, right? Yay, nuclear war. Okay, so and there are you can still look up to this day eyewitness reports of people who are like, yes, I worked at Malmstrom Air Force Base. I was worked with the Minuteman nukes, and this happened. We saw a UFO. We lost the ability to launch. All right, there's other small stuff here, but okay, yeah. Then in the 1960s, we start to have more and more the abduction phenomena occurring. Yeah, it's about to take the next step of weird. Let's talk about abductions. Actually, the big one is Betty and Barney Hill abduction. Let's talk about abduction. So you've got well over 10,000, just loads and loads and loads of eyewitnesses. They tend to call themselves experiencers who have claimed to have been taken aboard alien spacecraft. Yeah, we should probably just end there. No. And it continues to the present day. In some cases, there is physical evidence, things like implants or effects at the abduction site, abnormalities in tree growth and the like, or burn marks, radiation. Other abductions are apparently non-physical, just to make it that much weirder. Like, some of them have evidence, some of them are like, you got a husband and wife, the husband's asleep, wife gets abducted, quote unquote, husband doesn't see anything, it's like nothing happened, she's just laying there in bed. But they evidently have a vivid abduction experience. And so that's weird. Oftentimes these abduction experiences are generational, even though it only sort of got the press in the 60s. And was investigated by John Mack, who was a Harvard psychiatrist. So in the 80s, he investigated some of these abductions accounts, talked to hundreds of eyewitnesses, and found that they had no evidence of mental health issues other than the abduction experiences, but no other typical evidence of mental health issues. And he became convinced that this phenomena and something about it was real based on his research. So Harvard, I hear it's a good school, and psychiatrist, so, which is kind of a soft science, but kidding, sorry. All right, so the 80s and 90s. Okay, so let's see, the 80s and 90s. So 1997, March 13th, you get an object seen above Phoenix. Why am I talking about this one specific object when people are seeing UFOs all the time? Well, this particular one had thousands of eyewitnesses of a 1 mile wide plus V-shaped craft above Arizona and New Mexico, including the governor of Arizona actually saw this. And you can look at it. They did a news report on it the next day, and he's like addressing the state, and then they have someone dressed up in a little green man costume come on stage. But then years later, he's sort of sobered up and opened up a little bit about what he saw, and that it basically corroborated what everybody else saw. This big V-shaped, mile-long thing in the sky, caught on the highest tech of 1990s cameras, which is not very high tech. So then a fellow named Bob Lazar came about in 1989. He comes forward claiming to have worked on a secret alien or government installation. He comes to this reporter named George Knapp, and he claims that he worked at a place called Area 51. You may have heard of it, right? So if you've heard of it, it's because Bob Lazar came forward and talked about it. So he was the first one to basically say there's this place out in the Nevada desert called Area S4 or Site S4 in Area 51, and he said, I worked on trying to reverse engineer alien spacecraft there, and he claims that they had 9 alien spacecraft that they were working on. So once again, this is where the general public knowledge of Area 51's existence came about, and its existence was not officially acknowledged until 2013. So there is an Area 51. It is real. As far as what the government says, this is where experimental aircraft are tested. So, which lines up with Bob Lazar's story, but maybe a little bit more extreme in his case. So, that's so if you know about Area 51, that's where that comes from. Area 51 is not that near Roswell, so it's quite a bit away. Some people think they're like right next door. No, they are not next door. So, continuing our UFO history. That's the Dunkin' Donuts in Roswell, New Mexico. Two of the most awesome things together at last. So we have December 2017, which is a big month for UFOs. Once again, we have our New York Times front page on the government's UFO program. This same month, all sorts of Christmas gifts for UFO people, is that there was an object observed in our solar system. You might be like, okay, whatever. They called it Oumuamua, which is Hawaiian because it was first observed from an observatory in Hawaii. And a Harvard physicist named Avi Loeb hypothesized this was an alien craft. You might be, why would you say it's an alien craft? Well, it did a couple things, like it had an elongate shape, which is not typical for meteorites. Even more disturbingly, it accelerated as it went through the first extrasolar object we've ever seen enter our solar system, and it accelerated as it went through our solar system, not related to gravity. So you can get sort of a slingshot effect with gravity, but its acceleration was not, as far as we can tell, brought on by slingshotting from planets or moons or whatever. So it accelerated. It's kind of scary. And New York Times kept up. In 2020, there was another front page article where they quoted former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. So if there was someone who might know something about this, you would figure the former Senate Majority Leader. He said this: "It is extremely important that information about the discovery of physical materials or retrieved craft come out." This is when they were asking him about this stuff, about UFOs. And so it started. In late 2020, there was a COVID relief bill, and in that COVID relief bill, Congress asked for a report on UAPs because all these reports were coming forward, being reported in the New York Times, and they were getting private briefings on what the government knew, and they were like, we need to know more, we need to know. Their concern was, are these a threat? And so this led to the creation of the UAP Task Force, the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force. You can download the report online, the unclassified report. Maybe the classified, if you find that, let me know, because there was a classified version. But in the public unclassified report, the U.S. military examined 144 different encounters with UAP throughout, I think it was between 2004 and the current day. There was no apparent explanation for 143 of the ones that they investigated, 143 of the 144. Many of them, 80, I believe the number was, included observation by multiple sensors. So it wasn't just somebody saw something flying across the sky doing crazy stuff, radar, visual, etc. And many of the craft in this report defied the apparent laws of physics, as we know them. And then there was a classified report that was given to Congress, and we don't know what was in that. Kind of cool if we did, but, cyber majors don't work on that. I'm kidding. That's illegal. But we can get some clues about what was in it by how Congress responded. How did Congress respond? Well, they responded with the 2022 National Defense Authorization Act. And so the National Defense Authorization Act funds our military, but in this particular year's NDAA was something called the Gillibrand Amendment for, I believe, Congresswoman Gillibrand, maybe Senator. And this Gillibrand Amendment specifically funds a UAP investigatory program. And so some of the language from the amendment, I put a lot of the language here, but I've highlighted some of the big stuff, which is really small, but whatever. So they define the term unidentified aerial phenomena. So what does that mean to the government? Well, it's A, airborne objects that are not immediately identifiable. Okay, whatever. B, transmedium objects or devices. What does that mean? I'll tell you in a minute. C, submerged objects or devices that are not immediately identifiable. Yeah, they're evidently below the water too. Then it defines this transmedium. Transmedium objects or devices means objects or devices that are observed to transition between space and the atmosphere or between the atmosphere and bodies of water. So moving under the ocean, above the ocean. These are unidentified transmedium. Yeah. So maybe if you're not a mammologist, that might be a transmedium UFO. But okay, some more language from the bill. Goals: develop procedures to synchronize and standardize the collection, reporting, and analysis of incidents, including adverse physiological effects regarding UAP across the Department of Defense and intelligence community. Analysis of data gathered by field investigations conducted, including with respect to testing of materials, medical studies, and development of theoretical models. to better understand and explain UAP. We'll get to maybe what some of this means if it's not readily apparent. Execution of an intelligence collection analysis plan to gain as much knowledge as possible regarding the technical and operational characteristics, origins, and intentions of UAP. This is where it gets fun. Supervise the development and execution of a science plan to develop and test scientific theories to account for characteristics and performance of UAP that exceed the known state-of-the-art in science or technology, including in the areas of propulsion, aerodynamic control, signatures, structures, materials, sensors, countermeasures, weapons, scary, electronics, and power generation, and an update on any efforts underway on the ability to capture or exploit discovered UAP. An assessment of health-related effects from people who have found them, and, nuclear stuff. Consultation with nuclear security, the number of reported incidents of UAP associated with facilities or assets associated with the production, transport, or storage of nukes. Wow. Crazy, huh? Okay, what does that mean? So, a few things we can glean from that. UAP apparently defy the laws of physics, including speed, maneuverability, and transmedium ability. Let's see a video of that next slide. Yeah, okay. So this is a grainy picture, but it's from off the coast of California, taken by one of the carrier strike groups of a UAP, transmedium UAP.
On a piece like that, off the coast of California,
You don't need to hear that. We don't need commentary. We just need to watch. Draw your own conclusions. Oh, there it goes. Watch down. Let's look at that one more time, in case you weren't paying attention. Yeah, let's do it one more time. We'll back up a little bit more. All right, there we go. So there's the ocean. Bam, bam. Under, up, gone. Okay. I know it's grainy. They're always grainy. Okay. Their origin and intention are unknown. They have adverse health-related effects. So some of the scientists that were involved in that initial UFO program, the OSAP, wrote a book and reported instances of rare cancers associated with close encounters with UAP, radiation burns. Ready to get weird? Take a deep breath. Okay. And the hitchhiker effect. Well, what's the hitchhiker effect? People who have encounters with these things experiencing ghost haunting, high strangeness activities. You see a UFO, and then you and your family and friends start seeing like dishes fly off the table and that sort of thing, which is weird. I don't like it, but there it is. And the association with nuclear plants. All right. What do we have next? Let's do one more UFO video. This is off another carrier. I think this is off the East Coast. And these were pyramid-shaped UFOs. There was, I think, something like 40 of them just hanging out in the sky above our carriers for hours. So not commercial drones, because they don't stay up that long. These ones that we know of. Yeah, so they look like big triangles. They're evidently pyramid-shaped, not triangles, but sort of. Hanging out, floating up above our carriers. Not a care in the world. Oh, San Diego coast. I lied. Okay. And once again, this video and the previous videos, the Pentagon has confirmed that these were actually actual videos taken with the correct provenance, etc. Let's see. I lost my place. All right. So, and there are some non-governmental efforts. It's not just the government looking at UAP. There's the Galileo project. Avi Loeb, the guy with the Oumuamua, the asteroid thing that sped up and was freaky, he started the Galileo project. The Galileo project is dedicated to the proposition that humans can no longer ignore the possible existence of extraterrestrial technological civilizations. One of their main goals is to get high-resolution imagery of UFOs because it's not just frustrating for you. And this is a collaboration of faculty at Harvard, Princeton, Cambridge, Smithsonian, Montreat. No, just kidding. I'm not involved. Sorry. Sad. Okay. So let's. I want to end with some possible alternative hypotheses for what's going on here. I've given you some evidence, some of it's stronger evidence, some of it's weaker evidence. I will leave it to you to tear apart in that sense. But in our last couple of minutes, let's talk about what it could be. I'm going to give you the one I think that has most support from a Christian perspective, but any one of these are potentially on the table. Maybe the one with the least support is natural phenomena. Why would natural phenomena have the least support? Well, the UAP task force, there are 144 sightings. 143, our military could not figure out what they were, and they were observed by multiple sensors in 80 of those cases. The Tic Tac that was observed by Commander David Fravor in the USS Nimitz entered from space and stopped at sea level and actively jammed our sensors. As far as we know, there's not too many natural things that can do that. Maybe some species of hawk or something, but maybe it's U.S. technology or foreign technology. So the U.S. has, we've worked on advanced flight technology for a long time. So we actually, after World War II, the U.S., we took 1,400 ex-Nazis and brought them here and had them work on our space program. So we can thank ex-Nazis for our space program and something called Operation Paperclip. So we've had this interest of, making all sorts of decisions to pursue crazy technology for a long time. The U.S. Navy actually has a patent on an advanced propulsion craft. It's this thing here. You can actually look it up in the patent office. The U.S. Navy submitted this patent saying it was a transmedium vehicle that can move between water and air and obtain high rates of speed, etc. The patent office rejected their patent, and one of the high-ranking Navy officials actually had to write the patent office and say, please approve this patent, it works. So there you go. And there is a paper trail for that you can find. The U.S. government has said that UAP are not ours. They've gone through a lot of difficulty to investigate them. So maybe it's a big disinformation campaign, but that's like a double conspiracy theory, which is awesome, but I don't know. Maybe it's foreign powers. I don't think it's foreign powers, because that would be game over, because these things can outmaneuver our best jets and go into space and all sorts of things like that, as we've already seen. And probably not human technology, because the UAP have been witnessed with these same capabilities since World War II, and potentially before, as I said. So maybe, maybe not. And it also does not account for associated phenomena like the abduction phenomenon, cattle mutilations, which we can get into in questions if you want to. It's weirder. All right, another UFO picture from a Navy cockpit there. So, looks like one of the like Batmobile type things. Okay, so maybe they're extraterrestrials. So the U.S. government is pretty sure that UAP are technologically advanced craft under intelligent control. There's pretty much no question about that. These aren't weather balloons. They aren't birds. They chase and interact with fighter jets. They sense nuclear facilities, etc. But we still don't have an answer to that question. Is abiogenesis deterministic? So we don't know if we would actually expect there to be extraterrestrials out there so that they could then evolve and come here. There's also long distances between nearest stars. So, a lot of people are big that, like Bob Lazar said that the craft that he worked on came from Zeta Reticuli, which is like 30 light years away. So if you could travel at the speed of light, it would take you 30 years to get between the two. Yeah, maybe that's not huge if they're really, really into it, but it's still a long time. But the craft that people are seeing have been hypothesized to manipulate gravity. In other words, so when you saw that initial Tic Tac video, you saw how it was a black color. That's because it was on a FLIR camera, which means forward-looking infrared. If something is black on a FLIR, in that setup on the FLIR, that means it is cooler than the environment around it, which means that it is not like one of our jets where it's pushing something out the back and moving forward, right? That's how everything that we have that moves goes. Our cars, our jets, whatever, you have propulsion. Well, they don't do that, and so it's been hypothesized that they moved by manipulating gravity, which essentially kind of making a bubble in front of them and just falling into where they want to go. If you can manipulate gravity, then space and time might be irrelevant. And I had a conversation with Dr. Spencer about this beforehand, and I don't know what I learned, but I'm confused, and evidently, yes, it can be irrelevant. All right, so what else? What else could there be? Next, weirdness. Okay, I'm going to call this one the Elohim hypothesis. What does that mean? So a common hypothesis among ufologists is not actually that UAP are extraterrestrial. In other words, there are people that study UAP and who have done it for a long time. If you've seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which I actually haven't, but there's a French UFO researcher guy. He's actually based on a real guy named Jacques Vallée, who essentially says, you know, that nobody seriously researching UFOs really thinks they're extraterrestrial anymore. Most would say they're extra-dimensional, dun, 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 whatever that means. I don't know what that means. C.S. Lewis would use the term macrobes. But so Elohim is just a biblical term for any non-physical being. Anything non-physical is an Elohim. This could be angels, this could be demons, this could be ghosts, human ghosts, right? So this is from a painting of Saul and the Witch of Endor, and Samuel's ghost comes up. So in the scripture it says that Samuel's ghost comes, it calls it Samuel's Elohim. So, and we know from scripture that Elohim are extraterrestrial, right? Some at least pre-existed the earth. So some of these non-physical beings were there before there was a planet. Job 38 says, God's talking to Job, "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Who laid its cornerstones? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God," which are Elohim, angels, demons, whatever, "shouted for joy." Told you it was going to get weird. So they're extraterrestrials, perhaps something more sinister than extraterrestrials. Bum, bum, bum. All right. What are the evidence? So just to be clear, you know, when I say the Elohim hypothesis, you might be like, oh, is he saying like demons? Yes, but Elohim hypothesis sounds a lot fancier and less crazy, right? Everybody agree with that? Good, awesome. All right, the Elohim hypothesis. So what evidence is for that? Well, first you have the anomalous health effects and the hitchhiker effect. So we see in Matthew that demonic possession can cause injury. And first off, you know, obviously you have to have, you wouldn't necessarily subscribe to any of this if you don't have a Christian worldview. So if you don't, sorry, pray about it, but we're going to go from a Christian worldview here. Matthew 12:43, really interesting passage. When an unclean spirit has gone out from a person, it passes through waterless places to seek rest, but finds none. Then it says, I will return to my house from which I came. And when it comes, it finds the house empty, swept, and put in order. Then it goes and brings with it 7 other spirits more evil than itself, and they enter and dwell there. Evidently, Elohim may follow or be attached to an individual, which is what we see with this hitchhiker effect. So people who have suffered from the hitchhiker effect, their friends and their family oftentimes have encounters with entities that have historically been called demonic. Wolfmen, ghosts, and all sorts of weird stuff. You're like, that's weird. Yes, that's weird. But that's what they say. There we go. Okay, the abduction phenomena. So the abduction phenomena is often generational. So in other words, you'll have people that say, yeah, I get taken up by aliens, but it happened to my mom and my grandmother or whatever. And in Scripture, one of the words that's applied to evil spiritual entities is familiar spirits. Give no regard to mediums and familiar spirits. They were called that because they were attached to a family lineage. Your parents would have experiences, and then you might have experiences. You get sort of some of this in like Deuteronomy, and says the Lord revisits the sin to the son to the 3rd and 4th generation, but to 1,000 generations to those who love him. So that gets at that. So we have evidence in Scripture that it is a generational thing. The messaging in the abduction phenomena is really weird, kind of anti-Christian if you're like from another planet and you don't know about that stuff, right? Abductees are oftentimes instructed not to pray to God. The abductors, the quote-unquote aliens, oftentimes take responsibility for Jesus' miracles. He was like, yeah, he was one of us. And they also claim to have knowledge of future cataclysms, and we all need to come together in love and peace and harmony, and not Christianity, and to be able to survive. And abductions are oftentimes only remembered after participating in occult activities like hypnosis. So you've got to sort of participate in some of the bad stuff that Christians are forbidden to get answers. What else? UFOs have spatial hotspots. So you have places that are kind of haunted with UFOs. In other words, you have regions where more UFOs are seen than other places. Something that's been attributed to evil spirits since time immemorial, in a long time. Right? Even in Scripture. Fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place or a haunt of demons. So why call it that if that's not a thing that's a thing? It's called Skinny Bob. It's a really good hoax, but it's a hoax. You can look up the videos. UFO occupants often take anthropoid or humanoid form. So you have things like people call them the Greys or the Norks. This would be like a Grey. That's meet the Grey. And we know from Scripture that Elohim often appear in human form and can change their form. Let's see. You have Sodom and Gomorrah. Angels come down to visit in a physical form, right? They actually grab Lot and pull him inside the building. Or in 2 Corinthians 11:14 it says, even Satan disguised himself as an angel of light. Evidently there's light. Evidently there's some sort of ability to change what they look like. All right. Next step of weirdness. Oftentimes the study or contact with UFOs is via occult means, and by that I mean just means that historic Christianity would say is not permissible for Christians to do. Things like remote viewing, clairvoyance, so basically meditating on these things and seeing and contacting alien life, which is, so this is the C5 handbook. Don't look it up, but it's a meditation-based contact. So people claim that by doing this thing, if you get a bunch of people together in the room, you can summon UFOs. We could do it now. We're not going to, because that would be bad. Don't do it. I looked it up. Right now is the 63,000th bestseller on Amazon. Outselling both of my books. Thank you. So. Also, like psychedelic drugs, that's a weird one, right? So Rick Strassman conducted the first DEA-approved study on dimethyltryptamine, or DMT, which is kind of a party drug. And interestingly enough, these people that took that reported experiences similar to contact with ET-like entities. So you trip, you talk with godlike beings, you wake up in 10 minutes and everything's happy, and then everything goes wrong with your life. Actually, if you read his book that he wrote, it's really interesting. Like they all felt awesome and wonderful, and then their life fell apart. I wonder why. And then study in contact with UFOs often happens. No, we already did that one. Oh, and last little bit of evidence. It's probably not much, but oftentimes Christian fundamentalists, quote unquote, are seen as one of the biggest enemies of UAP research. So, according to the people involved in that UFO program, OSAP, the reason it was shut down was because there were high-level officials at the Department of Defense that said, we shouldn't be messing with this stuff because it's demonic. And so they shut it down. And they were very salty about that when they shut it down. I want to end with pretty much everything, but this section and all, with a quote from a book by, this guy's name's Tom DeLonge. Anybody know Blink-182? Okay, well, it's an old band. They do stuff and things. Get off my lawn. So this guy was in a band and decided to become like a UFO advocate. I don't know how to start. But he ended up sort of spearheading a lot of what's happening in terms of the government actually talking about what they do now, using some of his contacts. And so he wrote a book, basically talking about there's something to this. In this book, he called it Secret Machines. And so, interesting thing there. We may visualize a Venn diagram in which the world, that's us, is in one circle. It's down the bottom there. And when it comes to the phenomena, all this UFO stuff, the two circles overlap in a small area. That region is the domain of the phenomena called in Mesopotamia the Gate of the Gods or Babylon. This is a non-Christian writer, and he uses the term for this phenomena Babylon, which if you've ever opened your Bible before, which you should and often, this is the enemy of God throughout from the beginning, the Tower of Babel, all the way through time to Babylonian captivity to the end in Revelation, Babylon. The bad guy. And this is a non-Christian who I assume doesn't know that context, saying, yeah, that's what it is. Okay, so how would we study this? Well, there's all this weird stuff, but it's all like, okay, the government has information and whatnot. Science has to be observable and repeatable. Otherwise, it's not science. It might be evidence, but it's not scientific evidence. But some phenomena in science are called cryptic. Actually, that's one of the areas I kind of do is cryptic species that are really good at hiding. UAP are kind of similar in that way. They may only be observable when they want to be. This is the same problem we have with any intelligent animal, humans, right? We can't really go out and like study people like we can monkeys or snakes or whatever. The way you study humans is by like surveys, and then they lie to you, and your survey finds out something. So how do you get over this problem of things being cryptic? Well, the answer is higher replication, more people and observational equipment. And this would probably involve cooperation with government and private sector sensor technology, so that can actually actively observe this sort of stuff. And that's happening more and more. And another way we would approach it scientifically is we would be skeptical of interpretations, but not doubt the testimony of otherwise sane eyewitnesses. If you're a Christian, you do not doubt the testimony of otherwise sane eyewitnesses. If someone asks you, well, how do we know that Jesus rose from the dead? Hopefully your answer is because people saw him after he died. He got up again, and he was dead. Then he wasn't. We believe it on the testimony of eyewitnesses. Now, the interpretation with something like the UFO phenomenon might be off, but what people saw is what people saw. And specifically, Christians should avoid forbidden forms of study. So if this is like a demonic phenomenon, we shouldn't attempt most forms of contact because that's bad, right? All right, and be creative and careful about other forms of study. So all sorts of weird stuff, and just to keep it real, we're going to really end this time, I promise, with another C.S. Lewis quote. I said it's going to bookend. Yeah, awesome. Okay. All right. And this is that same essay talking about alien life. Christians and their opponents again and again expect that some new discovery will either turn matters of faith into matters of knowledge, or else reduce them to patent absurdities. But it has never happened. What we believe always remains intellectually possible. It never becomes intellectually compulsive. I have an idea that when this ceases to be so, the world will be ending. We have been warned that all but conclusive evidence against Christianity, evidence that would deceive, if it were possible, the very elect, will appear with Antichrist. And after that, there will be wholly conclusive evidence on the other side, but not, I fancy, till then, on either side. All right, so if you're here tonight and you're getting extra credit, we'll get that out of the way. I'll dismiss you. If the extra credit password is Zeta Reticuli. So if you're in one of my classes, and write that down, because if you misspell it, you won't get your full extra credit. So those of you, if you want to head out, feel free to. But otherwise, we have plenty of time for questions. Well, yeah, get your picture of Zeta Reticuli. That's in. Thank you. And that's this past summer on my American Ecosystems class. So if you want to see aliens, American Ecosystems. All right, questions. Let's let everybody that's leave get a chance. What's that? ZETARETICULI. Yeah, on the ES test. Get with the program. Yeah, just know the secret word. It's like Gnosticism. Yes. No, yeah, animal diversity too. Yeah, for sure. I don't think I told you guys, but sorry if I didn't. I definitely told you. You guys weren't there. You don't pay attention. You're bad students. All right, questions. Yeah, come on. Hey, Matthew. Whoa, John, Matthew. Oh, goodness. Matthew, what you got? Did you have a question?
So, okay, how conclusively do you think we can dismiss a human cause? The CIA, they've done some terrible shady stuff to the American people.
Yeah, so the Nazis were actually working on a flying saucer, the Die Glocke. I think that the biggest evidence about that is we tend to like to use our toys, and the fact that this technology has existed been observed for a very long time. I think like, so for instance, the stealth bomber, when we had the stealth bomber, the public knew it existed within half a decade. Because it's like, we've got this, let's bomb Iraq with it.
And we'll have a composite cause, where some of this is to an extent manufactured. There is something serious backing the fighters.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's certainly a strong possibility, maybe even a probability. I think there are certain experimental aircraft. So this is my UFO. I saw this over Greenville, South Carolina. So I don't know what it was. It looks like Boba Fett shit, but I don't know. Yes, well, yeah, we can't call it that anymore, but yes. Go ahead, John.
I know some people are trying to explain away, especially the New York Times stuff. It's sort of visual or camera phenomenon, like flares and stuff like that. Do you look at that at all?
Yeah, so I mean, I would. So to me, the videos are the least compelling of the evidence. They're just like, we like visual things. Like, I would not even give any sort of video or photographic evidence the time of day if it didn't have a provenance, or in other words, it didn't come from a specific entity that said, we saw this and several people saw this, and this is just kind of proof that we did, just because of where digital manipulation is. So in terms of it being lens flare, you had the pilots who have claimed to have chased these things and whatnot. So I think the pilot eyewitness testimony and radar operator eyewitness testimony, at least in some cases, is going to overrule that. I'm sure there are some cases where it's like, okay, I saw something weird, it wasn't something weird. That's happened to me before, I was camping out in the desert, and there was like this string of pearls of lights, and I was like, oh great, the invasion's beginning. Saddle up, kids. It turned out it was just Elon. It was So yeah, there are lots of, there are mistaken, there are still birds, there are still aircraft, there is still lens flare and that sort of thing. Yeah, for sure. But I think when you have multiple corroborating things occurring with active pursuit, active jamming, and sort of what would we call the observables of it, I think that puts it into a different realm, so to speak. And also the associated phenomena. Like I said, we didn't have a lot of time to get into things like the abduction and cattle mutilations and that sort of thing, but they seem to be related to this UFO thing. And, I think the FBI investigated something like 5,000 cases of cattle mutilations where they were associated with UFO sightings, reproductive organs removed, no apparent blood anywhere, even though they were completely drained of all their blood, didn't make a single arrest. So it's been heavily investigated, just from different angles, for sure. Yeah, Christian. Yeah. Weirdly arbitrary. Okay. Yeah. Oh goodness. Do I want to go to that level? Weird. Okay. Don't judge me. What does Holocaust mean? Anybody? Greek? Viola? It's from the Greek word for burnt offering. So if this is a Elohim type phenomena, what is the effect when you sacrifice 6 to 9 million Jews? I mean, so we have stories in Scripture of Elohim that want sacrifice. These gods want sacrifice. Molech wants you to sacrifice your children. Why do they want that? Does that mean nothing? Is it just sort of a weird thing? They're just like screwing with us, like we just want to kill your kids or whatever. Maybe, but yeah, I don't know. I would say the common hypothesis for people with more sense of pride than I have, I guess, would be the nuclear age, dawn of the nuclear age, because obviously they have an extreme interest in our nuclear facilities, and so that happened at the end of World War II, obviously. So there's a couple of different things, but yes, the human technology could be. Obviously, the Nazis were very involved in at least similar technology, but the Nazis were also very involved in the occult. Some of the stuff from Indiana Jones wasn't just taken out of a vacuum. That's one of the things that I find very difficult about the phenomenon is like, okay, I saw that in a movie. How can that be real? But oftentimes, if you dig, you realize that the director or the writer, they're getting their ideas from stuff that happened contemporarily or previously. So is that kind of okay? Cool. Let's go MJ. Then we'll go back to you. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do me a favor. Next time you see a plane, get out your smartphone, take a video. This is my green belt. I was driving 70 miles per hour, granted, but that's the best I could get with really zoomed in. And it looks like a cross. It's like Jesus returning, except that was a couple months ago. So, congrats, everybody! You've all been left behind. Other questions, Matthew? Yeah.
I can also speculate that maybe you see the able to electrification spreading to every corner of the first world, a lot more
Demythologization? Yeah.
There's a lot more interested in education about sky.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like you might just have a corresponding great increase in
I don't know about increase in education of the sky. I feel like any of our ancestors could have navigated using the stars, and and I would say that if anything, increase in electricity. Yeah, there could be some zeitgeist related things. I think that's counteracted by the fact that increase in light pollution also decreases our visibility of aerial phenomena. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And it seems like there was actually, my wife showed me this article. There was a UFO sighting in Marion recently, and it was like at 3 a.m. on New Year's Day. Yeah, and it wasn't me. So there's other people out there.
You were sleeping.
Yes. Yeah.
So it almost seems like these kickbacks are attempting to alter or even guide the course of history and massive
yeah. International relations. Yeah. Events. Yeah. I once again, that gets hugely into the just eyewitness and largely speculatory region of things. But there are certainly those who say that, yeah, we talk with these things and they tell us that a catastrophe is coming, or that we've got to get our act together and form one world government so we can solve our problems and all that, which is not the least bit scary. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question, and yeah, there's not a lot of high quality evidence on whether there are occupants or not. So yeah, certainly when you have a drone, the threshold for what you can do in terms of movement is a little bit more intense. Even still, some of the observed things with these UAP would still cause a normal propulsive craft to essentially fall apart from the G-forces. Things like stopping on a dime and being able to move off. But yes, yeah, in terms of occupants, you're right. The abduction phenomena and the UFO phenomena might be two different things. I mean, some people say they were taken up into UFOs, but but they could be, yeah, for sure. Could potentially be two different things. And it's not just saucers that people see. Let's go back to where'd that one picture go? The one from the cockpit there. They see the Tic Tac shaped stuff. Oh, there's that. Anybody catch that one? That's fun. That's a historical painting of the crucifixion of Jesus with. I mean, those are, I think, obviously just angels that are shown in stars or whatever, but still kind of funny. Yeah, so that's an ancient aliens thing. I don't really get into that because it's poor evidence. But that's yeah. So this was something seen that's not. You get Tic Tacs, you get saucers, you get cigar-shaped things, and yeah, back there.
Are there other examples in prior civilization histories here in this
Yeah, so potentially, a lot of it. So there's a really good YouTube channel called Fringe Pop 321, where it's great. Michael Heiser, who's actually a Semitic languages specialist, but really interested in sort of fringe things, looks at some of that stuff and what the hieroglyphs are known to mean and whatnot. Because there's like there's a hieroglyph that looks like an Apache attack helicopter and that sort of thing. I'm not saying that that there isn't any example of that, but most of the examples that are sort of readily available seem to have cultural explanations. So even something like Ezekiel's wheels within wheels is a motif that you can find on Egyptian hieroglyphs, for instance, where you can see like, oh, it's a throne with actual wheels in between wheels and that sort of thing. So I'm not saying no, but I'm not aware of anything that's not been, pretty. Why are the pictures always grainy? Well, they're just. I mean, it's like Sasquatch. It's just always blurry. They're. So yeah, there are. Yeah, that is a great question. And there are a lot of potential explanations for that. One of it could just be, maybe they're all birds, but then you have to deal with all the evidence of things, fighter jets pursuing them and people who did see them and saw them clearly. Supposedly, first off, camera technology really hasn't been there till recently to capture these sorts of things. From some of the people, so there was the U.S. military, ex-U.S. military guy they were interviewing in that video. His name's Luis Elizondo. He was the head of that ATIP program that investigated UFOs. He said there's a lot more there that's yet to be declassified because oftentimes it will show classified sensor abilities that we have. Like maybe it's a video that's shot above, some section of the world we weren't supposed to be in, or, so they haven't been declassified, but he says that some of them, he says one, for instance, was, there's one where they got a craft within 50 feet of a jet, and one was 23 minutes of pure sci-fi was the term he used. So maybe they're out there, and hopefully we'll see those, and there's definitely an effort to reveal more of that. I guess you could call it disclosure effort. That is happening, whether it's from the NDAA, but all this sort of other stuff as well. So hopefully we'll see that. But as is, some of this stuff does give us some good information, at least, like the FLIR footage, where it shows you the temperature differentials and whatnot, which I realize is all a terrible answer for, bad excuse for Why don't we have good pictures? But that's all I got. Yeah.
I was going to ask, of like the videos that maybe are most convincing, how many of them are with this footage that is
So the big ones are the three videos from that news report. So I think they're called Gimbal, Go Fast, and something or other. But they all have names. They're all attached to the New York Times article. So those are all FLIR, forward-looking infrared videos. And that's a lot. Although I think the pyramid one was obviously a where was that? Night vision scope. So, yeah. But evidently, supposedly, there's more, but just hasn't been released yet, which is not evidence. So, but there it is. Yes. The Flying Dutchman. Is that thing from Pirates of the Caribbean? Okay. Oh yeah. Cool. No, I'm not.
So something along the lines of people would see a ship, not a spaceship.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could call it a spaceship, so there's a different space.
Okay.
A sailing vessel.
Yeah.
Above the horizon. You know,
Okay. Yeah, I believe that's related to a natural phenomena, the same phenomena that
but
like mirages.
It's just interesting because
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm certain that could be the case in some cases. Yeah, for sure. It could certainly be the case in some cases. Others where they're actively pursuing them, or there was one where one of the common sort of UAP types is an orb, sort of a glowing orb, and they've had some people have had some pretty close encounters with those. There was one report from the ALSAP report of a person passing through their body and causing some sort of look. I don't know. I would have to ask that person. I haven't had a close encounter with an orb, thank God. I would probably try to exorcise it. Yes. Yeah, lots. There's for sure. Definitely the superpowers. China, Russia. There's quite a bit of activity. But that video showed a lot from Latin America. Brazil particularly has a lot of. There was a widely sort of eyewitness sighting in Brazil with UFOs and beings that supposedly were violent towards. So if you just look up like UFO encounter Brazil, there was evidently a lot of eyewitnesses that experienced adverse effects and beings and all that weird stuff. Okay, cool. Interesting. Yeah. Potentially some of them. Yeah, I mean, ball lightning is a real phenomena. It's it is not a long sustained phenomena and certainly doesn't appear to move as if under intelligent control. But there's certainly instances where ball lightning is probably the best explanation, like Brown Mountain Lights. So we have our own, UFO phenomena around here. If you go to, what do you call it, Linville Gorge, north side of Linville Gorge, there's Brown Mountain, and people see ball light phenomena, orb phenomena there on a pretty frequent basis. With something like that, you got to imagine if there's no evidence of it doing something freaky, then it's probably something like ball lightning for sure. Yeah. Huh? Cool. Thanks. What was that? Luke? Oh, please. Uh-huh. Goodness. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yep. Yep. Well, not becoming demons, but yes. Yeah, fallen angels, yeah.
And
What?
they had this, I mean, obviously they're producing the film.
Yeah, Genesis 6. It's day one of Sunday school.
But they also described, if I'm correctly, as having new technology.
Yes, so the Watchers in the Book of Enoch, which actually has some corroboration in Scripture. So in Daniel, certain angelic beings are called Watchers. Obviously, Jude talks about the Book of Enoch. Yes, in the Book of Enoch, they were said to have brought evil things to us, like weapons of war and cosmetics and other. Yes, so well, they call it the seductive arts. Basically, they taught men how to kill each other and women how to seduce men. And yes. So think about that.
And also, in Daniel, where the same word is used that is known that the creatures
Yeah, absolutely. The abduction phenomenon. Yeah, for sure. And so the abduction phenomenon is also very similar to what you had in the Middle Ages with, like, they would call it, like, incubus, succubus.
Yeah. And Nebuchadnezzar is later tortured by another spirit that makes him go mad. So it's the
Yeah, so they don't know that the demons are really out there because you're crazy. Yeah. Yes.
The other unique thing that this class of fallen angels
Mm-hmm.
is that at the end there it says that have been imprisoned in the valley.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Yep.
you interpret that as being some of the earlier stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what if there's something that
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's actually a thread of that in Revelation. It says that there are spirits that are released from their bondage in the earth, which many scholars think is a direct reference to those. So yeah. If you want to bring the Bible into it, it gets really weird. So you want to be all Christian about it. Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. You can go look up podcasts where experiencers will talk about all the crazy things that aliens did to them all day, and that includes, like sexual experimentation, hybrid creation, all sorts of weird stuff that is just, you don't know what to do with that. It's like, great, there are hybrids.
And so the cow mutilation, any other animal mutilation, do they just really big cows?
Supposedly, but the big one tends to be cows, and there's lots of photo documented evidence of that with sort of precision cuts where this happens, like, essentially overnight, and people see a craft, and the next day there's this cow in the field that has precision cuts, reproductive organs removed, no blood anywhere on the scene, sometimes broken legs as if they've been dropped from a height, and.
So you're telling me that the alien spacecraft are running on board?
No, that is too weird. Okay. Yeah. No, crop circles. I mean, there are people. There are definitely hoaxers that make crop circles. That's all. I mean, whether that's connected. A lot of the hoaxers say that they feel compelled by some sort of force to make them. So there's, I don't think, and they all happen in most of them happen in the UK, some of them in the US. They've done some, so fun podcasts you can listen to, Paranormal, which is a podcast, it's Christian, a bunch of Christians that look at peer-reviewed literature based on paranormal events. So they actually look in scientific publications that have done peer-reviewed studies on paranormal events. And they have one on crop circles, and they were like, oh, we examined this, and they had really shoddy methods when they figured out that this corn was modified some way. Yeah. What's that? Nazca lines? Yeah. I don't know. Well, okay. Here's the thing. So here's the problem with ancient aliens, and well, first off, it's all based off of people's work who've since been proven that they're not very good at translating the ancient texts when they talk about like the Anunnaki. So most of that is of poor academic merit, and also a lot of it is kind of chronological snobbery, where it's like, obviously our ancestors were too stupid to build the pyramids, like so I'm not saying that nobody had zero help building pyramids or whatever, but without any evidence, I certainly wouldn't make that conclusion. But yeah, the Nazca lines are weird. Why would you make those big lines that make these shapes that you can only view from the air? Yeah, it could be.
People very against mathematical model. They couldn't know what they were doing.
Yep.
They made one-offs.
Well, and yeah. So, and if you do want to, yeah, they also had a lot of interaction with what they would call spiritual forces and whatnot. So if you look at the Aztecs and the human sacrifice, they sacrificing on top of their temples, and ayahuasca, which is a has DMT and makes you trip and see gods, and they tell you to do things. So you can still do it to this day. Don't. Go ahead. Yeah, Saray. Probably the Elohim hypothesis. I think that it gets weird enough where that seems like the only satisfying explanation, and it seems like it seems like you can explain most of it either natural stuff or stuff that Christians already believe, right? So if you're a Christian, you should already believe that there are angels and that there are demons and that they do all these things. So why do we have to have a new word for it? Maybe it's aliens, but without evidence, these aliens don't do anything new that hasn't been reported of demons or angels throughout history. Lots of people see it through the lens of, okay, well, when they talk about angels in the Bible, those were aliens. I would kind of take the conservative point of view of, no, you're looking at it backwards, that when you see aliens nowadays, you're actually seeing what people have seen all along. Yeah, that's a weird one, right? Yeah, so they have technology, but so that's weird to me because, but a lot of that has to do with how angels are given to us as we're growing up. It's like, okay, angels are just like these glowing light beams, and they live in the spiritual world, and we're sort of told stories about angels, but when we look at the biblical evidence, there's not a lot there. But the angels came down on chariots of fire to pick up Elijah. Chariot was the most advanced piece of technology that they had in that day. So perhaps it's not out of the question to think of angelic beings as having some sort of technology. That sounds really weird, but that doesn't mean it's untrue. No, because nobody made the chariots of fire. Those were angelic. Well, they would have used the best word to have for it. The same way we see it in the sky, we see it in the sky. We call it a craft. It's like, okay, well, it's kind of an airplane type thing. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, but is the whole thing about bees should not be able to fly? Is that true, or is that a myth?
I'm not an apiologist, but I'm pretty sure bees conform to the laws of physics. Okay. There's a question here. Did you have a question?
Yeah. So do you think that the statement made by that guy who said he worked at Marriott in one of those?
Yeah, Bob Lazar.
Yeah. Do you think that is compatible with
yeah, in terms of like, do angels have aircraft? Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I will begin with the firm answer that I have no idea. But also, as Luke brought up, there is historical precedent for for stories of angels having given humans technology. So, in the Book of Enoch, although I don't think the Book of Enoch is canonical, I don't think you should read it as scripture, but it does record stories that were probably passed down that say that, okay, they gave us weapons of war, they gave us, I think it uses the term cutting of roots, so like medicine and psychedelics and that sort of thing. Yes, most cultures will say, so even with like the ayahuasca, they say that the gods gave them, which is really interesting because ayahuasca is made from 2 unrelated Amazonian plants out of thousands and thousands and thousands, most of which will kill you. So either a lot of people died to have a good trip or they had help. And maybe, correct. One has DMT, but the other makes it DMT that's able to be activated in the stomach. Because usually, if you eat DMT, and you might be wondering how I know so much about drugs, let's not get into it. Yeah. yeah, yerba ayahuasca. So, anything? All right, cool, guys. This was fun. If you have any other questions that are just burning about whether aliens crash starships, we can talk about it. But if not, have a good night, everybody. Watch the skies.
It's going to be in 3 files because you have a 30-minute cutoff. So
Cool.
you're missing a few seconds between each one.
That's fine. I got it on this too. So.
Dope.
My theory is everyone was tripping on ayahuasca the whole time.
It could be. Well, so here's the weird thing about ayahuasca, though. People will have group experiences with entity contact. So you'll have a bunch of people that have ayahuasca, and they all see the same thing, which means it's not just in your head. Yes.
Are there going to be more lectures in this science lecture series?
Yeah, probably.
Annually.
I'm hoping once a semester, but at the very least